not the KPMs. So the key performance measures going to the Oregon legislature from the agency is different from these performance measures that will be voted on by the board for them to assess our performance. So with the recommended scenario that we bring to the board in November, we're deriving different metrics that we could then set 10-year targets that would go into the implementation plans. And so targets would be something like where we expect to be in 10 years if we manage this way and things are going as we expect. And the implementation plan is meant to be kind of that amount of time that lets us do the work, see the forest respond on the short term, and make adjustments for the next implementation plan. So that 10-year cycle is our level of monitoring, responding, adjusting our management. We'll be reporting more frequently than that for performance measures. So, there's always opportunities to see what we're doing, see what the resulting performance measures are over time, and bring the board's attention to things that stakeholders want to see focused on. But for November, we're bringing a select set of performance measures that are going to be, the big ones. This model that we're bringing, it has a timber focus because harvest has such a big impact on every other aspect of resources in state forests. And so a harvest target would be, one performance measure that we're bringing, the amount of sold volume that we're planning. And that would be on a decade level for the board to approve as what they expect to see with a range. So we're thinking of, a target, a range, and that helps, the board is not allowed to direct harvest as where it happens, when it happens. And so doing it on a decadal scale with a range, we're trying to keep them at arm's length while they can still express their expectation for how they want the forest to be managed. Another one that we can bring is carbon sequestration and storage. And for this one, I reached out to Danny Norlander, our climate person in the agency. He wrote the climate change and carbon plan. I was asking him if there were specific targets designated by the state. The state has the Oregon Climate Action Committee, which was formerly the Oregon Global Warming Commission. They have a report on natural and working lands and where they want the state to be in the next few decades for the amount of additional sequestration. But Danny said there isn't a ownership by ownership target that group has designated yet. So from the modeling, our forest, we totally expect it to be a net sink of carbon going forward. And from the modeled outcomes and from the recommendation that we're going to bring to the board, we'll be able to say, this is where we expect to be for the storage in live trees 10 years from now. And this is where we expect, this is the amount of sequestration we expect in growing forests and in harvested wood products. And the last one I'll talk about is just adaptive capacity of forests. So this is a performance measure. Adaptive capacity is written into the board's vision for Oregon forests. And we just got in our inbox a new executive order today about climate resilience on natural and working lands from the governor. And all of them are speaking to, how do we keep our forests, the products they provide, the ecosystem services they provide, how do we keep them resilient in the face of disturbances like wildfire and in the face of climate change and other pressures. And so for adaptive capacity, there are a number of metrics you could use, but there are so many different strategies that you can use to try to promote resilience in forests, and there's not one perfect definition for like what we should be doing. So one thing I presented to board members this month is a table of different strategies that came from like an international working group of like ways you can increase the adaptive capacity of forests. And of the dozen strategies, some of them contradict each other. It's like maintain native species because they're well adapted, promote new species because it'll be the future climate and they'll be there. Shorten rotations because that will allow you to reset your forest with new species more frequently, or lengthen rotations because old trees are more resilient. And so what I'm saying is like adaptive capacity isn't one number, it isn't one thing. It's something we have to be thoughtful about. For a number of these strategies, where we've landed or what we can report on to the board, we're thinking about growth rates of trees through time. And what we're using is the Forest Service's FIA, the Forest Inventory and Analysis Monitoring Program that's been going on since 2001. And we recently in 2020 tripled the number of monitoring plots on state forests so that we could have a better idea of what's happening. And that monitoring is still happening. Even with chaos at the federal level, they were able to get most of our plots done this summer. And so going forward, what they do is they remeasure every tree in those plots every 10 years. And what we can see is as detailed as we want to get, down to the species, down to the type of stand, we could figure out how quickly trees are growing for their age and whether that's changing. Are we getting more positive growth? Are we getting more negative or slower tree growth over time? And when we aggregate that to our forest, that's what we're going to be reporting on to the board is like, is our growth rate in our forest, is it maintaining even with climate change? And so that's one of the things I'll be presenting in November. And growth rates are good because they affect so many different things we care about. So, are we growing carbon in the forest quickly? Are we growing products quickly? Are we growing new habitat and HCAs quickly? We need growth rates to be maintained to do any of that. So that's the reasoning for presenting that along with adaptive capacity. And then I'll just note for other performance measures with habitat is another one that we model in these scenarios. And each of the scenarios that we've presented to the board was modeled in a way that they would comply with the commitments in the HCP. And some of them have more wiggle room than others, but all of them are designed to grow the habitat we commit to over time in the habitat conservation areas. As far as other performance measures, I really appreciate the feedback I got from you all back in May. I sent the survey around with different options for metrics for the 11 performance measures. And so with those, that feedback and the feedback I got from the board, feedback I've got internally, I'm still looking to simplify and make the set of performance measures something that will be informative and something that we'll be able to commit to reporting on at the frequency that we need to be held accountable. So just a select set in November, more to come in June when we bring everything back. Happy to answer questions.
I feel I should know the answer to this, but I taught and I always encourage my students to ask questions. Is there a lot of overlap between the key performance measures and these measures that the ODF is bringing to the board? No. Okay.
No, so the KPMs, there are 10 of them, and that's at the agency level. 2 of them relate to ODF, to state forests. And I don't know what the plan is for the KPMs, if they're going to be amended.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a couple of things about the overarching agency KPMs. And it's always really hard to develop a key performance measure for agency performance anyway, for any aspect of its business. There's a lot of them that aren't a really good fit that we would like to make some changes. And there's a process that we'll go through working with the legislators for that legislature to get us to a better set of KPMs that are a little bit more relevant. In the case of state forests, we have KPM number 5, KPM number 10. One deals with revenue outcomes, which is kind of a terrible performance measure because we don't control the price of the product. We're price takers on that, right? So we can control volume and or volume offered anyway for sale. And so we'll be shifting. There will definitely be a KPM around that. We're looking at a different KPM that really speaks to the adaptive capacity of forests as well. It may not be exactly the same, however, as what we showed to the board. I have a feeling there'll be some similarities in that one. And that's as we shift from current plan to future plan, where the current KPM 10 is really focused on those complex forest types, and that is no longer the strategy by which we'll be managing. And we don't feel it's really appropriate to put a bunch of habitat metrics to particular species. I mean, that'll be monitored under the HCP, and that's great for that compliance piece there. But we really feel the legislature needs to look at something a little more broadly around our resiliency and adaptive capacity. And that really is the question at hand across the landscape today anyway. So you'll see a shift there. And we may have a new KPM that tries to get at some of the social aspects, I'll say, outside of economics and jobs, really focused on our recreation, education, interpretation program. So we're going to try and really kind of describe that. And when we talk about it at the legislative level too, they're monitoring our agencies doing what agencies they say they're going to do. And that's really the key question for the legislature. Whereas for our forest management plan, it's kind of like, what kind of forest outcomes do we want over the long term? And what are the things we need to be looking at to track and see if we need to do adaptive management and so forth? How do we make that happen? So it's two kind of different spaces to be in. But yes, we will be changing up the KPMs as well for the legislative KPMs.
Yeah, and then so why do we have our own performance measures, right? Recall the board really doesn't have purview over the implementation plans, like explicitly per se, and they still need some way to evaluate the division's performance and whether we're meeting greatest permanent value, et cetera. And so these performance measures that we're talking about are directed at the board. It's their measure of greatest permanent value.
Other questions?
Thank you, guys.
I got one more quick topic, could stimulate some discussion, but the HCP too, right? So what is the status? We don't know. I'm joking. So on the one hand, we met a tremendous milestone recently, or I should say the team that's been working on it, several of folks are in the room today. We submitted the 6 of 10 chapters of the final draft to the services, which was essentially the 6 they need to get started. The other 4 are going to follow closely behind. But we submitted that final draft HCP, and 6 hours later, the government shut down. And so we haven't heard from them since, of course. They had their timeline prior to the shutdown, had them say, sort of anticipating take permit issuance spring, summer of 26, and sort of July was the month they kept saying as sort of the far end of that. So we were anticipating permit issuance by July of 26 prior to the shutdown. They had built some buffer space into that, so we may still be okay and may be on track, but obviously the longer the shutdown goes on, the longer it's likely to affect that timeline. So sure, that's a concern. For sure, that's a concern. And then additional concern are whether or not reductions in force are directed at these 2 agencies. And so when they do reopen, are the same people present? Are all of the same people present? Because if not, that will delay us as well. That's all I have right now. I mean, I will say on the one hand, we were working really well with them. We were having frequent meetings at all levels, very technical to the very high. There was quite a bit of alignment, and they were both prioritizing this HCP. And that should remain when they come back, unless, there's new EOs or whatever. So we're just waiting with bated breath, basically.
Thank you, Nick. All right, let's move into forest health.
Okay, good morning. Let me quickly share my screen here. So good morning, I'm Sean McKenzie. I am the Forest Health and Aerial Survey Specialist in the Forest Health Unit over in the Forest Resources Division. And so I was asked today to come and talk about three sort of ongoing and continuing and in one case emerging forest health issue affecting state forests and forests particularly here on the west side more broadly. So the first one I'll start off with today, if my computer lets me advance, is Scotch broom, which is, I think we've all seen the scenes as we drive through the Cascades or the Coast Range of hillsides of lots and lots of yellow flowers. This was a weed that's native to Western Europe and was introduced here to the Pacific Northwest for for roadside stabilization, and has since expanded into a whole host of natural areas. To identify this plant, it's a woody shrub, and you'll notice its green ridged stems. Flowers are borne in axials, which is where the petiole and the branch meets. And then it has these trifoliate or clover-looking leaves with three leaflets held by a short petiole. And the leaflets tend to be sort of egg-shaped. In botanical terms, that's obovate. It's a member of the pea family, so it has these sort of classic bilaterally symmetrical flowers with highly specialized petals, including the banner, which is that top flower, the keel, which is the bottom, and then the wings on the sides. As a member of the pea family, its fruit is a legume with a hairy margin and 5 to 9 seeds per pod on average. There's a couple variations where you might see that towards the top of the branches, the leaves can be sessile, meaning that they don't have a petiole and are directly attached to the stem, and then they may be simple instead of being trifoliate. And then occasionally the flowers can be red. So in Oregon, Scotch broom is particularly a west side issue, although there are some populations east of the Cascades. It generally follows the precipitation gradients here in Oregon. And the reason it is so prolific as and is considered one of the most expensive invasive weeds in forestry is because it is a very prolific seed producer. One study I found said that it can produce over 6,000 seeds per plant. And these seeds are pretty long-lived, which increases sort of the temporal aspect of its invasibility. And then on the spatial aspect, it can disperse just from the bursting of its pods up to 15 feet. And then with animal dispersal or human dispersal, it can be even farther than that. One of the ways it spreads spatially are through roads and through transport. The seeds get onto vehicles and then they transport. And this is something that we've kind of seen a lot in San Am State Forest. Other ways it spreads are through streams. The seeds fall into waterways and then get transported down the waterways, and they can become invasive through riparian corridors. And then finally, ants in particular are attracted to some chemicals on them and may increase their transport. So we don't, sorry, Tyson. In fairness, Tyson was the one who did give me these photos, so I took full reign. um, so the Forest Health Unit itself does not have a systematic or a programmatic monitoring of Scotch broom. We rely on forest inventory and analysis data, and FIA did do a complete remeasurement of all the plots that were in the Beachy Creek and Lions Head fires, but those have not yet been published. So I don't really have any data to show on cover, except for one that was for a panel remeasurement that showed one plot with Scotch broom in it. And that one plot had over 60% cover, but the others didn't. So maybe not the best picture quantitatively, but just anecdotally, Tyson and I went out a few years ago to do a different monitoring project, and you can really see the extent of the invasion of Scotch broom here. This is up by Niagara Creek, and where Tyson's standing here, you can see the Scotch broom has really formed a dense monoculture. So I'm going to go on a very brief tangent into the world of population ecology to help kind of give the context for management options. So in population ecology, one way we understand how populations respond to management is by doing demographic analyses. And so you can think of this sort of cartoonish model of the life history of a plant like Scotch broom in these life stages and then the transitions among them. And this is called a Markov chain. And so, oh. Okay, sorry, Dan.
I'll explain it to them later.
All right. So if we take that concept of the states and the transitions among those states within the population, and we quantify the states and find the number of that population, and then quantify the transitions among those states, those states, we can then project what the population is going to be in the future through matrix multiplication. And the reason to do this is if we focus on one portion of the life history of the plant, and then we tweak the rates of transition, we can then see what the effects are going to be on the population. And if we do this sequentially for each transition, we can figure out which one of these the population is most sensitive to, which is called elasticity. And that helps us figure out the best way to manage these species. And this has been done in the Pacific Northwest for Scotch broom. This is some work by Ingrid Parker out of the University of Washington, where she actually did this demographic analysis across a variety of different prairie and urban populations of Scotch broom. And what you can see is that it's really variable, and sometimes there isn't really one vital rate that is particularly elastic for Scotch broom. In forestry, we often have sort of one major approach of broadcast spraying and have one impact throughout the life history. And this is in weed ecology circles is called the big hammer approach. But as this elasticity analysis shows, if you do that, it doesn't necessarily have it may not be that impactful on the population. So a better approach is an integrated approach where we use a variety of different techniques to manage the population throughout its life history and have impacts throughout on all these transitions. And this is considered the many little hammers approach in weed ecology circles. So those some of those hammers we can use for chemical control. These are sort of the four main herbicides that are recommended for Scotch broom treatment. Triclopyr, which is a synthetic auxin, is probably the best for west side forest because it has the least amount of non-target effects on conifers except for pines. For mechanical control, mowing is effective if it's done repeatedly. Pulling can be effective for especially in places where like riparian zones where mowing or herbicide spraying may not be suitable. One danger with pulling is that can disturb the soil and lead to additional recruitment of seedlings. And then another effective approach is cutting and then wicking with an herbicide for mature plants. One kind of a big hammer that we have in forestry that we can use is cultural control. Scotch broom is not shade tolerant, and so if you get a dense, vigorous canopy above Scotch broom, that can really limit its population. And then the other thing we have is classical biocontrol. These cute little guys are both biocontrol agents that eat Scotch broom seeds. And these were introduced in the early 2000s, and there was repeated studies on the rate of seed predation. And you can see over 10 years, they were starting to see upwards of 80% seed predation. So hopefully down the road, that means Scotch broom will be less of an issue. All right, so the second agent I wanted to talk about today is Swiss needlecast. This is probably another one that's pretty familiar. This is an ascomycete fungus that affects Douglas fir, and it broadcasts its ascospores in the spring. Those then infect the needles, and then over the summer, the hyphae of the fungus grows, and during the winter, the fungus then fruits, and its pseudothecia, which are its fruiting bodies, begin to occlude the stomates and the needles of the Douglas fir. And then in the spring, the asci mature and the cycle repeats. So what are stomates? Stomates are basically the breathing holes of plants. These are cells and gaps on the leaf surface where gas exchange happens. And as the pseudothecia grow, they grow up into the aperture of the stomates here. And so this, you can see that happening here in this scanning electron micrograph. And you can even see this with the naked eye. So all those little black dots on the needle of the Doug fir are the pseudothecia. And once enough of those pseudothecia are occluding the stomates, gas exchange is reduced. And then eventually what happens is the tree responds by abscising those needles, and those needles drop. And with the drop in needles comes a concaminant reduction in growth. And kind of the way that it's quantified in terms of the effects on Douglas firs through the needle retention. So seeing how long it takes before the needles abscise from the pseudothecial occlusion. And so the Center for, or CIPS, the Center for Invasive Plant Silviculture at Oregon State actually related growth rates to foliar retention. And you really see that once foliar retention is above 3 years, then you don't really have much of an effect on growth. But if it's less than that, and particularly if it's less than 2 years, that can dramatically decrease the growth in Douglas fir. And so some silvicultural interventions that we can use for Swiss needlecast include tolerant genotypes. So there isn't any known resistance to in Douglas fir to Swiss needlecast, which would actually be preventing the hyphae from growing. But there is tolerance where the Doug fir will retain their needles for longer. And so that's one way to avoid it. Swiss needlecast only affects Douglas fir, so alternate species are a viable option, but they may not meet all management objectives. And then finally, thinning is an option by virtue of just reducing other competitive stressors on Douglas fir, and taking away that effect on reduction in growth. This is something we do monitor systematically in the Forest Health Unit through our aerial survey program. The way we survey is we have observers in the plane with tablets that consider the host species, where they are in the state, and then look for particular visual signatures. And in the case of Swiss needlecast, this would be chlorosis and loss of needles in the canopy. And that helps us infer what the damage causal agent is. We take these data and we give presentations like this one, come up with technical bulletins and scientific research to help inform silvicultural prescriptions and forest restoration practices. So our most recent survey was in 2024 in May, and we survey along a two-mile grid at about 1,500 to 2,000 feet above ground level, and we cover about 1.7 million acres from the Curry-Coos County border north to the Columbia River. And so this is kind of what we saw from that survey, where you can see sort of the most severe Swiss needle cast is concentrated up around Clatsop County and down around Coos Bay. This has kind of been an ongoing pattern of increasing intensity of Swiss needle cast since we began surveying in 1996. And there is a bit of methodological difference in how we've surveyed. So what we used to do that sort of affects the data I presented. So what we used to do is we just draw a polygon where we saw Swiss needle cast damage, and then we'd assign a level of severity. So maybe that's, in the case of this polygon, around 2,500 acres that we map. And so for acres mapped, here's sort of the trend over the last 15 years, where you can see that we're on the whole mapping more and more each year. But one thing you might have noticed when I drew that first polygon is, hey, there's a whole lot of alder in that stand. And so we've changed our methodology now so that we're also assigning the percent of the acres affected. And then when we interpret the amount of damage, we take the acres mapped, we multiply it by the midpoint of the acres affected to actually get the number of acres affected with the damage. And so here's, since we've been implementing that methodology since 2018, you can see it tells a little more nuanced of a story, that maybe it's not the million acres that we see, but more around 500,000 acres that are actually affected. If we break this out by county, it basically follows the size of the county and the proximity to the coast. So you can see Clatsop, Lincoln, and Tillamook counties have the most acres affected. Doing aerial survey, a little too fast. Doing aerial survey provides a great visual and gives us some of the best photos for presentations like these, but it's definitely not the most precise way to, or informative way to measure the effect of Swiss needle cast on Doug fir. So one other way we do it is through ground monitoring, where we can actually estimate foliar retention and pseudothecial occlusion, and then we can interpolate a map from our ground monitoring data. And this actually provides the average foliar retention in kind of a spatially explicit way, which would help inform when silvicultural interventions are necessary. As you might remember from a few slides ago, generally once foliar retention is over 3 years, there's not really an effect on growth. And this does mirror pretty similarly, this interpolated map mirrors pretty similar to where we're seeing the most intense Swiss needle cast. All right, so the final agent I want to talk about today is emerald ash borer. And I think this one we might all be familiar with because it's been in the news a lot. This is a bruprested or wood boring beetle that was introduced to North America. Its native range is in Eastern Asia and China and Japan and the Korean Peninsula. It has a 1-year life cycle where the pupae become adults in May and June, and then they fly, lay their eggs, and then the eggs hatch and the larvae burrow under the bark in the summer. And then during the fall and winter, the larvae feed underneath the bark, go through their life cycles, pupate, and then reemerge again in the spring. The reason they're so deadly to ash trees is that they eat a lot of the vascular tissue. And so here you can just see it up close, one of the larvae feeding. And they feed on 2 really important layers of the wood, the cambium and the phloem layer. And so that basically cuts off the tree's ability to transport sugar and nutrients up and down from its crown to its roots. It has been termed the most destructive pest in North America. I think some estimates have put the death toll of ash trees, anything in the genus Fraxinus in North America, over 100 million trees. And on the East Coast, you see scenes like this where basically every Fraxinus has died. And this happened over a pretty quick period in the East. You can see that the mortality sort of follows this sigmoidal curve where it starts off slow right after initial introduction, and then it hits an inflection. And within 20 years, upwards of 95% of trees can die. In North America, we first detected emerald ash borer in 2002 in Detroit, Michigan. By 2007, it had expanded to most of the lower peninsula of Michigan and into neighboring Great Lakes states. By 2012, it was pretty much throughout the Midwest and into the Northeast. And then by 2017, it was detected throughout much of the eastern United States. And then we had our first detection here in Oregon, which was the first detection west of the Rocky Mountains in 2022. The reason we're concerned about it here in Oregon is that we have one native Fraxinus species, Fraxinus latifolia, Oregon ash, and it grows basically throughout the West Coast and in Oregon, pretty much everywhere west of the Cascade Crest. This is a pretty important riparian tree and really helps with stream temperature regulation. To identify Oregon ash, it's a pinnately compound. It has pinnately compound leaves and opposite branching. The underside of the leaves are pubescent, and then it has 5 to 9 leaflets per leaf. And it is sexually dioecious, so it has male and female flowers on different individuals, and then its fruits are a cluster of single-winged samaras. This is pretty typical of what we see in the Willamette Valley, where we have these remnant patches of Fraxinus latifolia in our agricultural areas, particularly in riparian zones. And so when we're looking for emerald ash borer, we look for these signs and symptoms: epicormic branching, which is branching on the lower part of the bowl; thinning crowns, these vertical bark splits; and then the really big alarm bells ringing signs and symptoms are serpentine larval galleries under the bark, and then these D-shaped exit holes that are pretty diagnostic for emerald ash borer. In Oregon, kind of getting a more granular view of where ash occurs, most of it is here in the Willamette Valley and then in the Umpqua Valley, but there are some populations in the Rogue Valley and along the coast. In the Forest Health Unit, we've been undertaking a project to use remote sensing to get 20-meter resolution detection of Fraxinus latifolia. So you can see for state forests, this is not as big of an issue because it doesn't. It tends to grow more in low elevations, but you can see there are small populations throughout the Coast Range and the Cascades with our state forest holdings. Right now, emerald ash borer is known in the 3 metro counties as well as Yamhill and Marion County. Those 5 counties are under quarantine. In this figure, the pink dots are the actual detections, and then the blue buffers are different response guidances. So the dark blue is sort of get your treatments ready if you're going to treat to protect your trees. And then the light blue is get ready by inventorying your trees for emerald ash borer. Here in Oregon, our timeline kind of started in 2013, where we started surveying and monitoring for emerald ash borer. And then we, based on the experience of other states, we put together a response plan that's kind of been our guiding North Star for emerald ash borer response. In 2019, we got funding to actually collect a bunch of seeds for genetic conservation. And then in 2022 was when we had our first detection in Forest Grove. In 2023, we started a treatment called slowing ash mortality with a bunch of trap trees to help slow the spread from the Forest Grove population. But then in 2024, we had our second detection of a population near Woodburn. These are what our our traps look like. There are these, you've probably seen them if you've been driving around the Willamette Valley's purple traps, and we have them scattered throughout the known range of ash, and they've been helpful in detecting some of our populations. And we've been doing this in collaboration with a whole host of partners over the years as we've put those out. I think I mentioned earlier that we've been doing seed conservation, and so the hope with this is to see if we can select for any potential resistance within our native ash populations to emerald ash borer. For this work, it was we really did an extensive geographic selection across a bunch of ecoregions, multiple populations, and multiple host trees. And we got about 1 million seeds from 4 ecoregions and from 27 populations throughout Fraxus latifolia's range here in Oregon. For treatment, there are a few classical biocontrol agents, and we've had some successful releases of those, but it's really not going to be enough to have much of an impact on the population of emerald ash borer. For individual trees, emamectin benzoate is a stem-injected herbicide that will confer about 2 years worth of protection to a tree, and we've done some here on ODF's campus in Salem, but it's not practical for large stands. Removing and replacing is a pretty is what we've been giving a lot of guidance to urban foresters. And then finally, at sort of a landscape scale, trap trees have been a great way to slow the population, but we unfortunately lost funding for that, so we have not been continuing with our slowing ash mortality program. The biggest thing, though, is education and outreach through a whole host of different campaigns and media and conferences, and getting the word out to the public about emerald ash borer and what they can do to slow the spread and what to do if they detect it. One of the biggest issues that we've been grappling with is, as this mortality comes, what do we do with all the wood, and how do we prevent spreading it into uninfected counties or uninfected states? And so there are a number of treatment options. So one are air curtain incinerators, and I think there was a demonstration here last Wednesday. I don't know if anyone was able to attend. But that's been a really useful way and helped out in especially in urban areas for treating the wood. The wood can be kiln dried for 60 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes. Will effectively kill ash. It can be chipped under 2 inches, or it can be milled for use, and then finally it can also be buried, and those are effective ways to prevent the spread of emerald ash borer. There are some uses with all of those. So with chipping, you can use mulch. With incineration, you can use it for I'm not going to try to pronounce this, but biochar. Then ash are used for specialty lumber, including baseball bats and some furniture. And then it can be used for firewood, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that buy it where you burn it. Do not move firewood. So if you are going to use it for firewood, make sure it has been sterilized first, and buy it where you burn it. So with that, I probably ran over time, but I'd like to thank my colleagues. So I am the generalist in forest health. So if you have specific questions about these, my colleagues, Gabby, Christine, and Wyatt are our experts, and they can probably give you some better details. But if I do have time, I would be happy to answer any questions.
So do you do your surveys in all the forest, including the habitat conservation areas?
Yeah. So our general survey is statewide. We do this in conjunction with the U.S. Forest Service, and this is an aerial survey that we fly, and it includes state forests, private forests, and federal. In general, we are not surveying for these except for Swiss needle cast, and we do a special survey for Swiss needle cast separate from our general survey. But for other forest insects, that's sort of our main tool for monitoring.
But we actually had hired a contractor to do a kind of a rest area, and they planted Scotch.
Oh no!
But luckily, our recreation person hated Scotch.
Yeah,
And he went in and pulled it all out.
yeah, and I think
It was actually, they were using it as landscaping.
yeah, I think it wasn't until 2012 it became I think it's a Class B noxious weed. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to ask Wyatt, but yeah, I think now it is illegal to sell Scotch broom.
So Sean was our inventory forester for a while, but clearly is too smart for us to retain him. So he's gone to Forest Health. But thanks, Sean. Really appreciate it. And just thought it must be a nice change of pace and broader forest health issues.
All right, so next up, we're going to talk a little bit about the REI program. Barrett already did a great job of kind of setting the stage for this, so I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet. And I will start by saying, unfortunately, there are no pictures of Tyson in here, so that's a good note for future presentations for myself. And so a little background on this, I believe it was the March SBAC meeting. I came and talked a little bit about recreation planning and where we were at and kind of why we had paused a little bit just with all the changes associated with the FMP, the HCP, trying to get things figured out. And we continue to see a lot of changes in our program. And so I'm going to quickly talk about how the program came to be and how that all, hopefully, there we go, how it came to be and where we're going in the next steps. And so the REI program was created to essentially bring together all of the social values, maybe not all, a good chunk of the social values and greatest permanent value under the State Forest Division. It was really created in roughly the idea in 2018, but was brought together in 2020. The vision, as I mentioned, was really kind of bring together the messaging, budgeting, and also just the consolidation of work on the social aspects of greatest permanent value, with, of course, the vision to really provide one voice, essentially, and one opportunity for everyone to explore state forests and get accustomed to the work that we do. And so what that became was a team of 32 FTE split between permanent and seasonal staff and spread across primarily Northwest Oregon area. And so at this point, our REI team sits in 5 different offices, whether that's Astoria, Tillamook, Forest Grove, Staten, or up at the Tillamook Forest Center. And specifically, what that really looked like, this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going next. Historically, in the last 5 years, what that's looked like was a recreation program that was split between an OHV program and an operations program. And so kind of let alone right there was a little bit of confusion along with names, a lot of mixing of programs. But essentially what that meant is that we had one group of folks in the program really working on motorized trails, and then the other side of the house worked on non-motorized trails, and then all of the facilities. So that's the recreation program, recreation side of the REI program. And the education interpretation program, which took place primarily at the Tillamook Forest Center, it really was focused on education interpretation work, which really is programming and interpretation services that we talked about this morning, primarily for school groups. Visitor services unit, which really is the administrative focus in the gift shop. And then our facilities unit, and that obviously having a gigantic interpretive center in the middle of the rainforest takes a lot of work. And so that was the initial alignment for the program. And what that really did, and what we've seen in the last 5 years, I'll break this down a little bit further. A couple REI staff members, and then on the recreation side of the house, you can see the numbers here broken down further between the motorized team, which doesn't show up great there in the color, and then the non-motorized team and facilities. You can see a pretty wide split as far as numbers and capacity. And then, of course, the education interpretation unit as well. So again, kind of thinking about that focus overall. But now that we're over 5 years into, I'll call it the experiment, that is the REI program, there's been a lot of really beneficial things that we've found, such as standardized workflows, primarily in our recreation facilities, and obviously at the Tillamook Forest Center, which already had that work. We also have seen an increased visibility for REI program work. And I think a good example of that we talked about today was an opportunity for us to really share some of the work we're doing and have much more visibility. An example would be OWeb or the reporting that we do now. That's a great opportunity to actually share what that work really looks like. However, and this was mentioned previously, we have found that there is a pretty significant misalignment for trail management. And we actually talked about this when we talked about volunteer hours. We talked about trail reporting as we went through those stats. We have had differences on the non-motorized side and the motorized side for quite a while. Additionally, that has been an issue for, as Barrett mentioned earlier, for MOUs. It also was an issue for our baseline management of costs too. And so as we've kind of got to this point in our program, we've also gotten to a point where we are really evaluating what are the next steps forward. And so we've gone through an internal alignment, and hopefully really this is where the questions start. So sorry if I've kind of quickly ran through this. But the changes that we're looking to make here in the next iteration of the REI program is a shift of responsibilities, primarily in our recreation program. And so, as I mentioned before, we had an OHV program and essentially an operations program. And in this new shift, we're moving forward with a alignment that actually really aligns up with the work and the way we report out on things. So even previously in that report, we broke things down on facilities and trail level, but we didn't actually manage our facilities and trails differently as far as lines of supervision. So moving forward, we have a trail program or trail unit, if you will, and a facilities unit that should really clearly outline some changes and provide clarity of the work and also provide clarity for the folks we work with. But first, I guess beyond that too, it also creates an opportunity for a little bit more continuity of the work for our user groups and people we work with, a little bit easier for communication lines. So just a final piece, and again, this is quick and easy, but we get a break right on time. What this really looks like is this is the REI program now as we move forward with alignment. So as we talked about, we have as it pops up, one position that oversees the REI program, and then opportunities to really align the work within the different points of our actual program. So that's the education interpretation program, the TFC. Moving forward now with a new shift to a trails manager position, and finally with the facilities unit as well. And so with this breakdown, we're very optimistic about some new alignment outcomes with this being standardized workflows between our facilities and trails, which should also, in a lot of ways, and I think folks that maybe have worked with us previously, the question's always been, who do I talk to? You know, what realm does this fit in? And hard to explain. If it's a non-motorized trail, go to the facilities team. If it's a facilities trail, stay there. So kind of a weird shift that we've had over a while. But probably the biggest piece is obviously being the social side of the State Forest Division in a lot of ways. It's hard for us to communicate that to the public. And so by cleaning things up here, it really creates a more standardized line for the public. If it's a trail, we now have one group that works on all MOUs and really has some opportunities for efficiencies there for our partners, both on the motorized and non-motorized side. And then one other thing too, as we are continuing to hold vacancies, as we mentioned earlier today, it's really important that we have about as clean a line as roles and responsibilities can possibly be. And with this split, we think there's a lot of opportunity for, again, some very opportunistic simplification of work. So in many ways, kind of reducing internal bureaucracy in our program. And so with that being said, I think that does bring it to the very end. And again, just a quick highlight as we move forward, it should hopefully clean up a little of the communication that we've had previously and an opportunity for external user groups. So wanted to open up for any questions and also get us to break.
Okay, we're at time for a break, so we'll take 15 minutes or thereabouts. We'll start right at 2. Okay. Okay, yeah. Thank you. All right, we're going to get started in about 1 minute.
You just want me to go ahead and get started? All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Colleen Kaiser, Planning and Operations Manager. We're gonna, uh-oh, I just hit the wrong button. Not share, I hit leave. So give me 1 second to get back. I'm going to change up the agenda just a little bit today. I'm going to start with implementation plans because we've had the conversations between the FMP and the HCP, and I just feel like that's a natural progression. And with the annual operations plan, that's stuff that I can go over in March because it's really not a lot of new information. It's just kind of a recap of where we've been. And so I want to give some opportunity to ask some questions and maybe do a roundtable about some questions I have around engagement in the new implementation plan process. Denise and Dawn and I and Nick, we meet fairly often to work on kind of work plans for SFAC and kind of topics that are coming up in the future. And we thought, because we're going to be going into kind of a December planning for SFAC, we thought that getting just some initial ideas and thoughts around implementation planning and engagement that could help us kind of dictate where we head over the next couple years, or not couple years, the next year. So just 1 second, let me get back where I was.
So Colleen, while you do that, I'll just kind of give a little broader context. So everybody remembers, or if they haven't heard about this, they know about this. So last December, Dawn and Colleen and I all met, and we actually talked about what we talked about in that past year and then laid out the agendas basically for all of this year. They were tweaked a little bit as we went along this year, but it worked really well. And we actually planned into like the first meeting or two of next year. And so getting feedback from everyone as part of Colleen's presentation will be really helpful as we move into this the next set of planning that we'll do in December or January for next year. Because what this kind of taking a step back and having some time to look at the entire year and the calendar of meetings for the year was really helpful. And so that's what this will set us up both around information about the IP, but it'll also help us think about how we want to set up the coming meetings strategically.
I am having some issues. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. Let me get to where I was. All right. Second, sorry, you guys. Evidently, I've forgotten how to do this. I should have checked it earlier. So this is a slide that we have shared a lot over the years, and it's just the planning levels that we work under, kind of our planning framework, if you will, for State Forest Division. And what you have here is, Nick kind of talked about the FMP and the HCP, and the next steps that we need to do is develop implementation plans and operations plans that coincide with this information. And so what we're looking at is developing new implementation plans, which are kind of 10-year plans that take the goals and objectives of the forest management plan. So those are the new goals or I guess are goals and strategies that we have developed, and let folks know how we're planning on implementing them over the next 10 years. And so we have, I think 19 goals in the IP. And what that is, we have a transportation goal, we have harvest goals, we have recreation goals, we have tribal goals. And this will be that connecting document that says, okay, over the next 10 years, in order to meet these goals and strategies, this is what we're going to be doing on the ground. These are the types of activities, management activities that we're going to be doing to implementing those. It's really the connections between all the plans that we have to work under. So the habitat conservation plan, the forest management plan, the carbon and climate change plan, additional rules that we have to follow under the Forest Practices Act, all kind of culminate here. And then these are the types of activities that we are going to use for any one of these resources or goals and strategies to implement them on the ground. The operations plan, which we talk about quite a bit, right? Every year we come in, we talk about the accomplishments of the operations plan and looking to the future to our new annual operations plans. Those are the activities, the on-the-ground activities that we're using to meet the objectives of those implementation plans. So what we have to do in order to implement the forest management plan and the HCP is we have to develop those implementation plans, new implementation plans and new operations plans. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions on that or anything to add. So what the timeline is, so, we've heard kind of the timelines for the new forest management plan and how it's going to be kind of post-dated based on when we get the incident take permits and when we are going to be ready to implement the next operations plan, if you will. So we just approved the FY26 plan. In March, like normal, right before public comment, we'll be bringing you the FY27 annual operations plan. And the first year, we will be implementing all of the new plans, if everything goes according to plan, will be with the FY28 annual operations plan. And that will go, basically will be approved by July 1st of 2027. So that gives us a little over a year and a half to develop these new plans. To kind of meet to redesign, if you will, all the processes that we've been using for the last 20 years, because we have all of these new requirements and new objectives and themes, and even some of the language changes that we're going to have to do a paradigm shift on. So that's kind of the timeline there, November 2025 to June 2027. The plan is we would be going to public comment with the new implementation plans and the new annual operations plan that meets the objectives of that. We would be doing that kind of that March through June timeline like we normally do for an annual operations plan. They would go together. That's what we did originally. With our current forest management plan and the original implementation plans. And that's just to reduce workload and just streamline the public comment process. So that way, if people are commenting on one plan, we can put it into the right bucket for how we talk about it instead of trying to do two different public comment periods for that, because it gets really confusing every time we put more plans out. The public gets really confused what plan that they're, rightly so, what plan they're commenting on. So what does this include? Like, what are the pieces that we're going to tackle in the next year and a half? And the reason why I want to kind of go through this is when I'm done, I'm going to kind of do a roundtable just to get some initial thoughts of what are you looking to engage on, topics that would be interesting to you during this implementation planning process, like as we engage on this over the next year and a half. What topics might you need more information on so we can help facilitate that engagement? And I can't remember the third question, so I'm going to go to the next one. And what suggestions you might have to improve this process. This is the first time that we're going to talk about this. So this is just kind of your gut feeling today to kind of start getting you guys thinking about that, but that won't end here. Some folks had to leave early. We will continue these questions as we kind of go into our next meetings. We can also take information, kind of, you guys have our emails. We can funnel that through Denise and just get initial or additional ideas and thoughts from you after the fact. Once you kind of hear what we go through today, and if something else comes up, feel free to get that information to us. We won't be able to engage on everything. We have a very wide, diverse group here. And we also have some pretty, once the policy is set at the FMP and the HCP level, our decision space narrows, as it usually does, because those decisions have been made and that's the policy we have to implement. And so the sideboards get a little bit more narrow as we kind of tear down through these levels of planning. And so we'll try to set those right sideboards and the topics that will have the biggest impact. But in order to do that, we need to kind of know what are your hopes and dreams for engagement through this process. And then we can talk to that and kind of determine a plan forward. So the process components include, we have to do a document framework redesign. So right now we have 6 different implementation plans across 2 forest management plans. We have reporting that is really geared towards our current forest management plan. And like we talked about early, there's a lot of language that's changing. There's concepts that are changing. We have a lot of reporting requirements through the new performance measures, through annual and 5-year and 10-year planning in the habitat conservation plan that we're required to report out on every year. We can't report on everything in an implementation plan, but what are the key things for each goal that we should be saying at the beginning of the implementation plan? This is where we're starting, and this is where we expect to be at the end of the 10-year plan if we were to do these management activities. So it's really a reporting redesign as we're going through that. The structure can change. We've had the same general feel to our documents for, like I said, over 20 years. We're looking for areas where we can streamline. There's a lot of language that's similar between the districts. It's very heavy word descriptions, which is fine. But is there areas that we can streamline that so it's less work both on staff, but it's easier for the public to consume and to understand where we're headed and what our commitments are. So we also need to do IP level modeling. That is, we talked a little bit about that. We're going to get direction from the board in November, and that's going to push us in a direction. And then we will be following up with implementation planning or modeling in order to show how that's going to occur across the division for the different districts or whatever level we decide on for that 10-year period. We have a lot of data updates to do. We've been kind of holding steady with the same information as we've gone through this process. So that way it was very consistent, but we're meanwhile still harvesting stands on the landscape, and those depletions and the future planned sales have to be added into that process just to keep with the updates that we're doing. We have to do our forest land management classification mapping. Right now, those are pretty detailed maps that go into the implementation plan that are really hard to read. The technology has changed pretty drastically since we set up that template. So we're going to be investigating some ways that we can access that information both digitally and through documents in order to be able to communicate that better. It's something that we have to do by law, and so we just want to make sure that that people have access to it in the way that is easier to consume than it is right now. Engagement planning, so that's part of this process. We have, a laundry list of folks that we've talked about engaging during the implementation planning process, from our tribal partners to our agency partners to different external stakeholders and public. So for each one of those, we have to build kind of a timeline, expectations, how we're going to incorporate feedback and what that loop looks like as we work through the process. So there's some big engagement planning that we're doing kind of at all of those different levels. We have to work through our policy updates and if there's any additional development that needs to be done. You know, with all these rules that are coming through, just the way we do business is a little bit different, especially like on the reporting and monitoring side of things. There's a lot of new work there that we have to do. There's work to our roads manual, our young SAM management manuals to just update to the current language and policies that we're going to be following. And then external tools and education. We have a lot of new reporting requirements. And one of the things that we have to do is figure out what external tools we want to be able to communicate easily. So it's, again, we're making a more efficient staff workload for the types of reporting that we have to do. So we're looking for those types of external tools, updating our websites to make sure that it has accurate and current information, and it's kind of in the new language and helps folks through this paradigm shift of going from structure-based management of the current forest management plan to the new management styles within the FMP and the HCP. And then one thing we've heard a lot from this group is some more targeted education, simple, direct infographics or videos that can help people who may not have as much access to the materials just to understand a little bit more about what we do. So kind of all of these things are on the table. It's pretty lofty in the time that we have, and we're going to have to prioritize what kind of gets what we can do before the IPs are approved and then what may have to take place after the implementation plans. But this is kind of the first step of that process is to start getting kind of where our engagement needs to occur. So that way we have enough time to kind of work through the process as we sequence out these activities. The one thing I do want to know is these aren't sequential things. This isn't in any order. A lot of these are going to have to be parallel processes that occur that are kind of spearheaded by different groups or different folks. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's questions or thoughts before I ask you guys questions.
With the exception of suggestions to improve the process, I think I don't sense I'm going to have much to offer there, but I just wanted to take the temperature and provide as much encouragement as I can on being assertive about the IP timeline. I think the board's coming to understand that this historic problem better. But I think they need leadership from below as well as from above to be reminded of the cost of delay and to make sure that I really like that simultaneous initial AOP and IP development. It provides a nice way to kind of marry them up into a discrete part of the calendar. So I just want to offer whatever help we can provide, and also just encouragement to drive that timeline.
So I think Denise is going to help. We're going to kind of just do a roundtable to just kind of get folks' initial thoughts if there are topics that you're interested in. And this is for SFAC members. I may need some help online because Denise doesn't have access to that. But you want to kind of go through.
So we can start in the room. And so I just wanted to go around to SVAC members. Thanks for kicking us off, Barrett. But in terms of, as you're looking at these questions, and then you're looking at the list on the slide before, you might have to swap back.
I
and
will,
forth a
I
little bit.
can, yeah.
Just any initial impressions, and then any thoughts you have around these questions. For Colleen, as we're, yeah, I'm just curious. Any SVAC members have any thoughts? And any SVAC members online, please feel free to just raise your hand and we'll have you chime in as well. And if nobody else wants to kick us off, I will kick us off. So I had a few thoughts. One was, and you already covered this, but I'm just gonna, I had thought it and then you said it. And so I'm just gonna kind of work through my thoughts as you were speaking. I think helping the group really understand the sideboards will be key. And I think helping us understand the sideboards linked to the FMP, and so that there's a like general understanding of what's in the new FMP and how that's linked to the IP, so that it makes sense to the group as we're having conversations. And then the piece that I got really curious about when you were talking was the HCP reporting requirements, because I don't think we've talked about them. We've talked about performance measures, but I don't think we've ever gone in depth around them. And it sounds like it's going to be driving work within the IP. I'm making some assumptions here, but that's what it sounds like. And so I think it could be useful. I would find it interesting and useful to have an understanding about how staff are thinking about, these much more expanded reporting requirements, how that's going to drive the work of the agency, because it really is, right? You've got a new FMP, you're going to have a new HCP, you're designing the IP and the AOPs to link back to that and to answer the reporting requirement questions. And I think if we had an understanding of those, to be able to look at them from an operations perspective could be very helpful. I would hope we could provide helpful input around that. And then you were getting very specific around like updating manuals and those kinds of pieces. We don't have to dig all the way into the weeds, but the operational pieces of that, and we wouldn't have to go through like a manual, but helping us understand what's changing. It sounds like you're basically creating a whole brand new framework. So if you wanted to come to us with a broader framework and say, and then break it down a little bit for us and ask us for our thoughts around that, I think could be a useful discussion. And I will stop there in case anybody else has any other ideas.
Just to tie in what you were talking about, the differences, what's the new part and what are the old part we're going to keep, so that you can kind of understand how we're changing things. Because for me, that's going to be huge. I need to understand differences. Okay.
I think educational tools will be vital, not just for us, but probably for people in the department and also the public, so they understand what it's all about and how it can play out and how it can't play out. And then, of course, the basics for me are that it all has to be tied to money in the end, that the plan can generate enough funds to keep everybody moving forward.
I don't remember, it there's never been a lot in the 10-year IP on the social project. I wonder, as this comes together, if there are, if this is an opportunity to put some high level planning objectives at that level. Maybe it's still not practical, but have there been discussions around that? Okay.
Joe and I meet every other week just on that topic alone, it seems like. So yeah, so that's definitely on the table. We'll be talking about and incorporating, that has been a missing piece in our implementation plans in the last 27 years. So that is something that we will be bringing into the fold because it is all State Forest Division management, and we have very specific goals around recreation management in the forest management plan. And so you will see, sections that talk about what the activities we plan to do to meet those goals.
Do you have thoughts about engagement and on the development of those?
I'm going to write that down.
Okay.
Engage on this.
Great. Okay. The other thing that comes to mind, and I think Margaret kind of teased this out in my mind, just based on our history here, that if there's a chance to misunderstand some of this, it will be taken. So the better you can red team, if you will, the kind of ways that people will intentionally misunderstand some of this stuff. This would be the time to be thinking, trying to get in front of just really good awareness and clarity, to minimize the most opportunistic among us who might want to portray these planning processes. Yeah, I know you understand what I mean. It just, you're all in such a better place than, the last big one, not the latest revisions, but the last big IP. So I'll stop there.
Okay, others? Other thoughts?
Anyone online?
Someone's talking.
I put my microphone off. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Hi, Denise and everybody. Thank you for a really informative meeting today. So at least I could do is chime in here when I'm being given the opportunity to weigh in, so to speak. Can I ask, what does the C stand for in FLMC mapping?
It's a classification. So it's forest land management classification system. And it's just a way that we show the areas on the landscape that have protections, specific protections. They're kind of listed out by category. So we'll have, threatened and endangered species or riparian or aquatic. They have special consideration, and there's different levels. There's kind of general strands that don't have really any special considerations. And then it kind of goes to focused and then to special and high value conservation areas. And it really is kind of, so this might be a really good topic for us because it's really one of the major building blocks of the new forest management plan. And so that could be something we could bring in and just kind of talk about what it is and then how does that look compared to what it looks like now.
Yeah, so for example, each of those designations has sideboards, right? And so if you're in one of those, that there are some constraints just from the get-go or not. And so it's important to understand those.
Oh, great question. Other thoughts?
It's just kind of grounded in the geography where I live and work out of here, and we don't have a a similar framework for harvesting as much as we do, um, the common school forest lands.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know where the crossroads is between, from a financial standpoint, where we are at a high risk of wildfire down here, but they're really, I haven't seen any analysis of how much more it costs to suppress fires than to do fuels reduction, but that's kind of where I would share, if I had that information with people down here, um, why that's kind of the status quo, or we're not going and doing more prescribed burns and things to mitigate our wildfire risk, and then maybe have economic benefit from that during wildfire season.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, I see everything through the lens of fire ecology, living in this ecosystem, so. And Vanessa knows, because I talked about the resilience of beavers versus the resistance.
No, this is Nick. I will say we are thinking about it down there a lot as well. The context is a little different because we have so little holdings down there. I think it's like 19,000 acres. Chet's gone. Like in Curry, Josephine, and Jackson among them. We're thinking about it in terms of the federal forest restoration work that's occurring, and in terms of good neighbor authority and what role we can play. And yeah, I mean, the challenge down there is funding that work if it doesn't pay for itself, right? So those are all questions we're wrestling with for sure at the agency level, if not at the division level.
Oh, one more. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that sentiment. I was really appreciative of Kate Skinner's availability to attend today's meeting, and I just wanted to report out that I'm planning to attend the Rooftop to Ridgetop Summit, and I really appreciate that ODF is, and the State Fire Marshal is providing that for the state.
I want to follow up real quick. One thing maybe to follow up on her comments as we're looking at this, and as we're thinking about expanding representation on SVAC is because I don't know yet how the structures of the IPs, because we're no longer like north, southwest area, right? It's all one. And so a framework to understand how you're looking at geographies that are much broader than SBAC has typically looked at could be an interesting conversation. I think most of the representatives are still from the Northwest, but as the group, hopefully, as the geographical scope of the group hopefully grows. But for those of us who've only really focused on the Northwest corner, I think helping us like spending a little time talking about like how you're thinking about what's happening in the other geographies a little more might be useful to bring to bring everyone along.
Colleen's taking notes furiously over there. I didn't want to wait.
Oh, yes, okay. No, I can do
her off. Is this a decent place for an AOP process question? Are we going to, have I missed or has there been any progress in how to deal with multi-year recreation type projects that don't fit well in an AOP accomplishment and scheduling process? I mean, I know that was on the table.
Yeah, and I think, I think we've made some pretty big strides over the last 2 years. Like that has always been historically kind of a challenge for us. the way that we currently have it in the AOP, where we talk about what year things are planned in and then what year things are operational, there's a table in there that kind of breaks that down. So we're tracking those over time. Likely we would adopt something similar to that going forward in the operations plans. But if you have feedback on that, that is definitely something that we would be looking to, one of the big things that we are talking about is like, how can we change these documents so they're useful, but they're a lot smaller because it's hundreds of pages that people have to review every year. So that will be something that we're bringing to the group as we go through this. Is like, how can we change this and still meet the needs of the group, and what suggestions do you have? So, if that's something you think we need to work on, I'll definitely take a note on that. And then when we get to that point, we can take a look at it closer.
I mean, it sounds like you're working on it. I just wasn't positive I remembered how far along you were, but it'd still be worth reporting on those. I think, you should be proud of what even if it's a stepping stone on a 5-year project, it's worth reporting in an AOP accomplishment.
Kind of in the accomplishment reporting, like what projects were completed this year.
Right, even though it's not a fiscal year project. Like I said, it's worth being proud of and worth letting us know about.
Any other feedback? Okay.
Cheryl also adds, similar to Tyler's adaptive management survey, can SFAC members receive a survey on the planning, reporting, redesign work?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So we can kind of look into that. That actually might be a way we can kind of get into the different goals and strategies and really kind of target that work, but also give you guys time to kind of process it and think through it as we kind of work on some of these topics. So that's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
I'll just throw something out there too related to, we're trying to just solicit input, right? But we certainly recognize between these performance measures, all the things in the HCP that people aren't aware of, and whatever other sort of targets or objectives we have under the IPs. And we really need to communicate that in a transparent way and improve folks' understanding. Like you said, it's like this is key, and that we haven't done that work yet sufficiently, so that even SFAC, it doesn't see all the things, right? We've been thinking a lot about it and sort of which pieces fold into the FMP and then carry over towards the IP. So like all will be revealed soon enough. But, so one of the things that we're working on is a document that sort of draws the direct connections between the FMP, the HCP, the IP, and policies, and sort of what are all the things that we're accountable for under what, and sort of what is the specific thing that you're held accountable to. And now we're just trying to figure out where we put that document in a way that's useful. Is it in the FMP in an appendix? Is it along with the IP? So there's more. Point being, we are working hard to sort of bring that information forward in a more like in a clearer way that people can really see, okay, now I see when you keep saying we have all these commitments, now I see what they are and when they're reportable within these planning cycles. Yeah.
I think bringing that forward to the SFAC for feedback before you finalize it may be a useful conversation, both for the group and for staff.
It's a good idea because you guys might help us tell like where it would be useful for it to live, right? And whether what we're providing is adequate. Yeah, it's a good idea, Colleen. I see you taking notes.
And I'll rewatch this so so I can capture anything I may have missed.
That's always been the most stunning depiction for me when someone's forced to really come to understand the narrowness of the decision space. It puts them in some difficulty because they've come loaded for bear with a particular grievance from whichever direction. And now and then there have been some pictographic or some really clear depiction of the narrowness of that space. And it's always been just an amazing spectacle to see the cognitive collision. And so it's be very good to achieve that kind of awareness as whenever possible.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest things, like my team is really paying attention to, our team is paying attention to, because the space is narrowing. We've got a lot more durability at on both sides, or on all sides, I guess, at the FMP with the HCP level. And so that it really does narrow down our decision space at the IP and the AOP level, even more so than we've had in the past. So it's going to be really critical for us to get that message out and to clearly define that as we're engaging going forward. And it's not something we've always been successful at. It's like we get a group up and running and they understand, but then you go to the next group and, in that constant cycle of education and just making sure people are being brought along and that you're capturing the new people that are coming in and engaging. So you're not wrong. And it is something that we're tracking, but I think we may need some additional support and some kind of watch outs as we're navigating through that, of what works, what doesn't work, and where we might have some blind spots.
Yeah, like now you say that, I haven't found a forum for it, but a public forum, and maybe this would be a good one, but the planning unit does these really eye-opening blackout exercises is what they call them when we're planning. And it's just, okay, let's layer on all the constraints and see what's available. You do that exercise and you understand exactly why we're in some of the places we are in this year, or heading there next year. So yeah, it's really informative to see that. It's just hard to think about what space and the timing of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's easily solvable, but it's very hard to get, as Upton Sinclair said, it's hard to get someone to understand somebody when they're to understand a thing when their paycheck depends on them not understanding it.
Or when
or their interests, yeah.
I think that forest land management classification system that we were talking about, the mapping exercise of kind of all of these different filters that we're working on, are going to be so key to make that process more visible. So right now it's kind of hidden in maps, kind of in the back of documents, whereas we can do some online tools where people can kind of see what we see, at least at a high level, of kind of those different levels and the things that we have to sort through to kind of get to this balance of GPV. What does this plan look like when you lay it over the landscape and the choices that we have to make? So I think that dovetails in really nicely with that forest land management planning process at a minimum level.
It's also, sorry to carry on, but I mean, it's also a good news story because it's amazing what is delivered off of these acres, given how that map looks and those constraints. I mean, it's just a deliverable machine of value despite those constraints. So it's a good news story too.
Well, I remember this was a long time ago when Tillamook had to stop working on really steep slopes where there were homes down below. You guys did that mapping exercise with SVAC. Like I said, it was a long time ago now. But so much of the forest ended up being blacked out because of that restriction. And so giving something it might be an interesting engagement tool, not just, and you were talking about this, but to think about um, how it could be, parts of it could be accessible to the public in some way. I've seen it used for housing on the coast, and it's very, very interesting once you start to see what's available. And it's, the same kind of narrow line that ODF walks in terms of making decisions. That's a really great idea, Barrett. All right, any other thoughts, comments? Thank you for this, Colleen, and for everyone for engaging. This was great. So we're going to wrap up just a couple of things really quickly. My time as chair is ending, and so Lisa will be taking over, and the group will need to elect a new vice chair to help out and to kind of learn the ropes before they step into the chair role. And then Dawn, you were going to talk about terms, whose terms are ending?
Yeah, actually, at the end of this year, we just have two long-standing members, so Denise and Barrett. So we've done a really good job to kind of alternate term limits for the group. In addition, so standard practice will work with those two, see if they're willing and interested to extend. Will be what we do there. I think we gave an update at the first meeting of this year. We've got that tribal position, which has been vacant since Mike Kennedy retired. Cindy Kolomachek has been doing some work with the tribes and LCIS, and Mike mentioned to me kind of an update from her is she expects that we may have an assigned member or two by our first meeting next year. And then Denise has noted that we'd have met this last year prior to this year to work and put a work plan together for SVAC. We will do that again this year. I think that really ensures that we're effective with this group and are finding the right spots as the division works through all these different planning processes that we incorporate SVAC input. So we will plan to do that again as we look ahead at this next year. In the past, our practice had just been, hey, any topics you all are interested in, and it's a bit of a shotgun approach, and then we try to incorporate that. I think this way, meeting with the chair and vice chair, kind of a more intentional process to get the most out of the committee. In addition, so while we may not have some new members, it's noted and maybe Cheryl had noted, this is a lot to take on, to understand. It's complex. It may take a year or two for SVAC members to get fully up to speed. I am working with Tim Hoffman in our public affairs to develop an SVAC kind of member and onboarding packet, which includes all the links to key information, et cetera. It would include a document like this accomplishment report from the last year for a new member, links to these different plans, that slide that Colleen showed with the FMP, HCP, IPs, AOPs. So we hope to add some more structure as well for folks just for that knowledge and understanding, and really still working kind of for that continual improvement. Absolutely. Some geographic orientation. Absolutely. And then with that, we have done various processes over the year to elect a chair and a vice chair and ensure we're meeting public records rules, et cetera. That's not the correct term, but also, giving SVAC members an opportunity to either nominate themselves or be nominated and that sort of thing. So probably need to work with Justin to remember what is the appropriate way to do that, but we probably will initiate that at our first meeting of next year.
I think with that, with about 10 minutes to spare, we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Special thanks to Emily, who organized this whole thing and got us food and ran the computer all day, and silent hero. So thanks, Emily.